statement's actually correct what he's talking about there, because John pretty much knew a lot about Jerusalem. Okay, and he's talked about things that they have only recently discovered.
Okay, but somebody's gonna say, well, he wouldn't have known that much about Jerusalem because he is a Galilean. So now we're gonna say, okay, well let's investigate that. Okay, let's see if what you're saying, it really has any weight to it whatsoever. So instead of just saying, well, I don't think that really is true,
right.
Well, let's investigate that. Okay, so let's go ahead and read. Thanks for opening in prayer. We got page 10's replaced, and then you got a new page 10 through 15. There's actually 15 pages here that deals with the author, who wrote the Gospel of John, and the purpose it was written, where it was written from, and to whom it was written, and stuff like that we'll be going through. If you read through this is fairly difficult. Okay. But I felt compelled to do this because of the fact that within the book of John, it doesn't say, I, John, the apostle of Jesus Christ, wrote the book. Okay? But there's internal evidence, okay, of who wrote the book. And just through deduction, we can determine, okay, who wrote the book of John.
Well, it tells us the answer in chapter 21.
All right. Well, it doesn't. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having 15 pages. All right. It says the beloved disciple. But who's the beloved disciple is the question.
Yeah.
And this is something that you haven't had to deal with, because when you go to Protestant church or you're within religious circles, they're not necessarily considering the arguments for John the apostle, the son of Zebedee from Galilee, wrote the book of John. They just automatically assuming it. Or is it possible that it's not even an assumption, but because people have worked through some various possibilities or plausibilities, the most possible one is John, the son of Zebedee, who is from Galilee. That's the most possible, all right? And it's the most traditionally accepted one. It would be nice if it was stamped right there on the first page that John, just like Peter says, or Paul says, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the church of Colossae, or the Christians there. I'm sending you this letter, so forth. But it doesn't do that with John. And you don't necessarily get into all the various ramifications as to who might or might not be in a Sunday school class or on a Sunday morning or whatever, because you automatically start with what everyone assumes is a fact, that it's John.
It doesn't really say that in Matthew, Mark, or Luke.
We don't know that for a fact, do you? You're just making an assumption on that.
Well, let's say, I, Matthew.
But is there internal evidence that says Matthew wrote Matthew by using the name Matthew within the book of Matthew?
Yeah. It does.
See, you don't know, because you wouldn't think. You would either say yes it does or no it doesn't. So, and I'm not trying to pick on you, okay? What I'm saying is that within the book of John, it doesn't say John is the beloved.
No, it says in the beginning.
It says in the beginning, at the beginning of John.
Right.
And there's a purpose for that. And I know it's kind of confusing, and I'll guarantee you that this material here is challenging. But you can read through it. But we're not going to read through it tonight. We're going to look at some highlights. And after tonight, we'll be finished with the intro to the book of John, and we'll actually get into John 1:1 and go forward, which is what you would be used to. But I would like for you to understand to some degree what individuals who are scholars have, and all the work that they've done to determine through inductive and deductive reasoning why it's traditionally considered that the book of John is written by John, the son of Zebedee from Galilee, who is within the book of John known as the beloved disciple. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so somebody could come up to you and argue with you that John didn't write John.
Right.
Well, you know, you would, no, it says right there, the Gospel of John. Okay?
I would have done that. Used to.
But that's not necessarily a requirement for a gospel book of the New Testament to be. It's not a requirement for the canonization or the requirement for a book to be included in the New Testament that it be titled after the author. But it offers some difficult. There's some theories, and they're difficult, but if you work through them, then you work through them. And you can conclude, which we will. So this is like telling you the answer before we get to the answer. I believe that the most probable answer to the authorship of the book, or the Gospel of John, is John, the son of Zebedee, from Galilee, better known within the book of John as the beloved disciple. All right? And so you might say, well, I don't believe that. Somebody else might say, I don't believe that. Well, then how do you defend it, or how do you support it? I don't expect for you to do that. I mean, I would even, without notes, I would have a difficult time doing that now. Now, maybe 25 or 35 years ago when I was going to seminary, I would have a lot of this memorized, but I don't have it memorized now. But I think these 15 pages will give you some, if you read through it, it will give you some insight as to what real theologians do. Okay? In the sense of establishing beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can say certain things and know that they know that they know that what they're saying is correct. And so, for example, I know that what I'm saying about truth, which is light, okay, is not understood by the religious, which is non-light, or those in darkness.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact. And one of the reasons that they know not is because they get rid of God, they exchange the truth for a lie, and then call the lie rational and reasonable and logical. All right?
Yeah.
So when it says light and dark, it's actually saying truth and non-truth, or truth and religion, because if it's not truth, which leads to relationship with God through his son Christ Jesus, then it's non-truth, which is religion, which doesn't lead necessarily to a relationship with God through his son Christ Jesus. And everybody has a religion. The individual you were speaking to at Pondy's is an atheist.
He says the high power.
He's an atheist because he believes he's a god, or he's a polytheist.
He said polytheism.
Okay, well, there you go. He believes in many gods, but by definition of God, that's illogical and irrational.
Right.
So,
but he thinks he's logical.
well, we understand that. People have so convinced themselves that they know the truth, even though it's a lie. And people do that in all walks of life, and it doesn't always have to do with something spiritual.
Right.
Okay? It has to do with a lot of areas within life. They believe the lie so much that they believe it to be true.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It can be, sure.
Yeah, stuff like that.
But the whole point is that that's why we share the gospel, so that they can ponder in Pondy's,
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, that's a good
See? Pondering.
ponder and pondies.
Okay. Pondering and
I'm
pondies.
sure of that.
Personally, I wouldn't go to Pondi's to ponder. Okay? And the reason I wouldn't is because you're going into a
And
hornet's nest. You're going into a place where more than likely it's not light.
Yeah.
Darkness.
Isn't that amazing that bars aren't lit, but dimly lit?
Super dark.
oh my gosh, it's like a strip club.
Well, there you go.
I don't know what a strip club looks like.
I used to
Maybe after
Yeah.
class
Similar.
you can
No, I
share.
did. I used to go to Colorado. That
Okay,
one.
you can share.
It's,
Okay, I haven't seen the
It's a
apostles,
little dark.
slinging around a dancing pole lately.
Yikes.
Last week we got into the authorship of the fourth Gospel of John,
That
an
is not a
overview.
good graphic image.
And there is a debate, and I don't know if it's intense. It might be among the those that are in theological studies. And we started looking at some possible problems with just considering the fact that that John's name is not included in the Gospel of John. And I think somebody said we got through page 5. Is that correct?
We're
we
at
stopped on
5.
Okay, so the question is, one might ask, if this gospel wasn't written by an apostle, what right does it have to stand in the canonized or in the canon scripture? And if you really just point blank, if you read through this, you'll find out that that was not a requirement to be canonized. All right? In fact, the titles have been given to many of the books, not necessarily by the authors. The authors didn't say, okay, I'm going to write the book of Acts.
Right.
But who gave it? Individuals down the road within church history.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that, okay,
Right.
entitling a book. But if you just say, hey, because just because it's not written by an apostle, it can't be a canonized book of the Bible. So apostleship was not something that was required as a check mark in the process of canonizing a book of the Bible.
Yeah.
Now, you can say that's good or that's bad, but the point is that wasn't required. And the other paragraphs there will kind of answer it for you. It can be proposed that neither the place of the fourth gospel in the New Testament canon nor its divine inspiration would be threatened automatically by non-apostolic authority. So the place within the canonized Bible or its inspiration is not threatened if in fact it was written by an individual that wasn't an apostle. So many people might say it doesn't have any authority if it wasn't written by an apostle. All right? But that's not necessarily the case. And we could look at that. Let's just read this paragraph underneath, an examination of the text of the gospel itself. So this is what you would call internal evidence. You take a look at the writing to see if there's any internal evidence in reference to this apostleship or apostolic author aspect. So go ahead and Dan, read that.
Look at the comment of John 21:24. This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down.
Okay.
End quote. In my estimation, the immediately preceding verses identify this disciple as the disciple whom Jesus loved. 21:20-23.
Okay.
But this indirect identification only leads us to ask the obvious question. Who was the disciple whom Jesus loves?
Okay.
The fourth gospel never identifies this person by name.
That's so true.
So the beloved disciples never mentioned by name.
But why do we say John?
Well,
Because there's associations.
yeah. So let's go on.
Okay.
We are required, therefore, to work with the few clues provided by the gospel itself in the hope of arriving indirectly at this identification.
Okay. So where other books might have a direct reference to, if we're going to eliminate some of the probabilities and come up with the highest possibility, we have to look at indirect information within the book itself. All right?
Makes sense.
Go ahead, Dan. 5 passages.
5 passages yield the clues. 1 is the final chapter of the gospel, in which places the beloved disciple in a company of 7 disciples on a fishing expedition. Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the 2 sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples, and that's in verse 21-2.
Okay, and one of these 7 is later called the beloved disciple. So now we've taken it. Let's say we had 20 possibilities. Now we're down to 7 possibilities as to who is the beloved disciples. And of this, it would have to be either Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the 2 sons of Zebedee, or the 2 other disciples. So now we're down to 7 people from information within the book itself. 7 people. Now, how would we determine which of the 7? What would be the proper? Yes.
I could be wrong. Now, the same way people try to figure out Hebrews, meaning writing style.
That can be one. Okay.
Okay.
But if we got 7 people and we line up all 7, what do we start doing to get down to the 1?
Process.
Deductive reasoning.
Deductive reasoning. So we start eliminating
Process of
individuals. Process of what?
elimination.
Elimination.
Oh, that's a good one.
So we're going to do a process of elimination. Possibly.
Awesome.
Oh, before I forget, I would like to move our Friday nights to 10 o'clock on Saturday because I want everybody to be wide awake. What do you think about that?
Starting when?
Starting next Saturday.
Okay.
What do you think? Anybody? 10 to noon on Saturday?
Works for me.
Works? Danette? Jill? Dan?
10 to noon? 2 hours, huh? Woohoo. We're moving
April
up in the
Fools.
world.
Really?
That's awesome.
You knew we'd have to get it in. It is April.
We've been trying to figure out a good joke this
And
whole
we
day.
went from A to Z.
Oh my gosh, we've gone through a
I heard some good ones today from
One of our
I'm awake.
options was
No, I'm awake.
one of our options was hey, we're selling the house, we're moving back to Denver.
But we knew that was way off the
Oh,
chart.
yeah.
That was a bit
I
too
was
much.
like, yeah, right.
Nobody would have.
No, but I did get my son Daniel. He called and he told me
Oh,
that he got another
gave a
10% rating
whopper.
on his
Couldn't
disability.
believe it.
So he's at 90% now with the possibility of getting 100. Plus they had some other information in reference to insurance we won't go into. But I said, he says, where are you at? And I says, I'm down at DJ at the VA hospital. He said, what are you doing down there? I says, oh, I was putting the awning on the camper that we got in the other day. And the wind caught it and knocked me off the ladder, and I fell. And I don't know if I broke my foot or I sprained it really bad, but they're going to check it out. He said, they're doing X-rays. I said, I think they're going to. He's not back with the X-ray results yet.
Jesus.
And we going on, and then I finally had to say,
Story.
and I mean, he was just soaking it in.
Is it
Yeah,
Dan?
it was for real.
He ended up figuring it out. He said, that's a nice April Fool's joke.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is April Fool.
They're doing
But he
zero.
still thought I was in GJ, so he didn't comprehend it totally. So, and then I says, no, I'm not in GJ. I can't go get my, because he's wanting me to get my VA records to see if I can get a disability after 50 years of being out of service, and I'm just not going there, all right? I don't need that, okay? I already know I have a disability, okay?
It's called
To some-
fading memory.
And to some, it's 100%, so get over it, okay? All right, so now we're going to do some elimination here. So, Dan, if you would read the next one.
The last 2, I'm talking about the last 2 disciples, did not necessarily belong to the 12, and one of these 7 disciples is later called the beloved disciple.
Okay, are we in the top 6?
Yes.
Yeah.
6?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah.
Now we're going to get into some serious stuff here. He obviously could not have been Peter, since Peter later asked Jesus a question about the beloved disciple.
So the he
Yeah,
refers
because he
to
asked
the
who
beloved
is
disciple. The
beloved.
he,
Yeah.
the beloved disciple, obviously could not have been Peter, since Peter later asked Jesus a question about the beloved disciple.
I know who it is. Nathaniel. Why? Because when he looked at Nathaniel, he goes, "That is a pure Jew."
Oh. So
That's-
now
that's-
it
that's-
should be the Gospel of Nathaniel.
I'm just throwing it out there because that just came to mind.
But
All
it
right,
says
well,
certainly on
I
the
could be
next
wrong.
Okay,
line.
so you're not walking on water tonight, so trust me. Okay,
Oops,
so
geez.
here, certainly,
Certainly, neither Thomas nor Nathaniel
No,
could have been the
that
beloved
was
disciple.
out.
okay, now just wait a minute. I want to stop right here. Go ahead.
Okay.
Don't just listen.
Certainly,
Okay.
neither Thomas nor Nathaniel could have been the beloved disciple, unless the writer mysteriously alternated within the same story between referring to a disciple by name, 21:22, and referring to him as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Again, in verse 21:20-23.
Okay, let's read that. 21 through 20, or 20, chapter 21, 20 through 23. Let's see what the theologian is referring to. So we already got rid of Peter, right? Peter can't.
Yeah, check.
So
Yeah, it ain't
there's,
Peter.
we're down to 6.
It ain't Peter. I know that.
All right, we're down to 6. I should have had little
I've got it.
soldiers up here. 7 soldiers.
Knock
We
them
could have
off.
knocked one down.
One down.
Okay, 1 down, 6 to go. And we're indicating that Thomas nor Nathaniel could have been, so we're about ready to eliminate 2. So read that portion of scripture.
21,
Yeah,
20 to 23.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hold on.
You ready?
Almost ready.
In 5.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, verse 20. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. You can't follow yourself.
That's true.
This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" Verse 21. When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die, but Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?"
Okay, so if if you read more, like 21 verse 2, go to 21 verse 2. Chapter 21 verse 2.
Simon Peter, Thomas called twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, Zebedee's sons, and 2 others of his disciples were there. We're together.
Okay. Let's read on further now. So we're eliminating Nathaniel and Thomas
Wow.
because they're mentioned along with the beloved disciple. So if in fact they're mentioned along with the beloved disciple, they wouldn't be the beloved disciple.
Right.
Does that make sense? Okay.
A cannot be B.
That's correct. Now, the next one, of the sons of Zebedee, James must be ruled out. His death earlier in the life of the church, before 50 AD, see Acts 12:2, far removed him from the latter part of the century when the 4th gospel was likely written. So just time. James was probably one of the very first apostles or disciples
Being persecuted.
to die.
He got killed, yeah.
All right. And there's internal evidence that this wasn't written by 50 AD. All right.
Wow.
So we can get rid of Thomas, Nathaniel, Peter, that's 3. James, that's 4. Okay.
We're down to 3.
Since no other members of the fishing party can be eliminated from consideration, it is clear Okay, it is clear because you got rid of Peter and James and then John, and they're the parts of the inner circle. So if you get rid of Peter and James, who's left? John. It's clear that the beloved disciple must be John, the son of Zebedee, or one of the two unnamed disciples. All right? So we still have three left. We got John and the two unnamed disciples. So let's see what happens here. Okay. So it has to be one of the two unnamed disciples. Or is it John? A second passage related to the search narrates the visit of Peter and the beloved disciple of Jesus' tomb. Little can be drawn from this account other than noting that this person appears to be somehow associated with Peter. But it cannot be proven from this that the beloved disciple belongs to the 12. So we're still, is it the other two disciples which aren't part of the 12?
12.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
A third passage places the beloved disciple at the foot of the cross, where he received from Jesus a commission to care. Now, this is really good internal evidence now. Okay? A commission to care for Mary. Dan, read.
It would seem it is likely that the one who witnessed the piercing of Jesus' side was the beloved disciple as well, and this is in verse 1935. Though this is less certain, however, nothing about the identity of the beloved disciple can be proven from this passage.
Right. But John was there to take care of Mary. A fourth related passage tells of Peter's entry into the court of the high priest through the help of another disciple. Read now the next of it. That would be chapter 18, verse 15.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Because this other disciple was linked with Peter in this scheme, some scholars identify the other disciple with the beloved disciple. This conclusion rests on the observation that on three other occasions in the fourth gospel, Peter and the beloved disciple are paired together.
So there was another disciple with Peter that went into the court of the high priest with the help of another disciple.
Yeah, who's that?
But we don't know. But that doesn't mean that other disciple is an apostle or of the 12. But what we do know is that when, in fact, Peter is helped, there's at least three other occasions in the fourth gospel that Peter and the beloved disciples are paired together. So whoever is, okay, so if you got salt and pepper and Peter is pepper, then salt would be the other or the beloved disciple. Okay? It is doubtful, however, that mere linkage with Peter would necessarily bring us to the identity of this other disciple as the beloved disciple. So you can't just automatically say that this other disciple is the beloved.
Not based
The
on
one that helped him. Not based off that 18:15.
No.
That's chapter 18, verse 15. I know it kind of gets confusing, but stick with us here.
I am.
Okay? A fifth pertinent passage describes the aftermath of the foot washing when Jesus told the disciples of his impending betrayal. Jill, would you read the little points underneath that one?
Upon hearing the shocking news, Peter motioned to the beloved disciple and asked him to press Jesus for more information.
Now, this is what's interesting. Only the 12 were there at the feet washing. So it couldn't be one of the two other disciples that aren't mentioned. It has to be one of the
So
12.
you can eliminate the other disciples.
So you can eliminate
The other two.
possibly. We'll see.
It's starting
Go ahead.
to narrow down, is it?
There you
It's
go.
starting to really narrow down.
Okay, just wait.
Good job, Mike.
Obviously, this disciple was positioned much closer to Jesus than was Peter, close enough to lean back against Jesus to ask the question confidentially. Here again we see an association between Peter and the beloved disciple, but nothing can be determined with certainty.
Okay, so I know how to really solve the question of who is the beloved disciple. We just look at one of those Last Supper pictures that we printed.
Okay. That's
There
it.
you go.
Yeah, there's a drama one.
That would
Mystery
do it,
solved.
right? No.
That was drama one.
So it would seem that these clues prove very little, but they suggest much. The presence of the beloved disciple at the Last Supper strongly suggests that he was one of the 12. So we're establishing, number one, who the beloved disciple was, and the fact that the beloved disciple was an apostle, or one of the 12 disciples.
At the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, Dan, you pick up on those 3 little subpoints.
None of the gospel accounts of the meal mentions any other than the 12 as participants.
Okay, boy, that really nails it. It's a disciple, which is an apostle.
So
Okay?
Da Vinci was not there.
Da Vinci wasn't.
Sorry.
It's about the Da Vinci
So
Code.
now we can eliminate.
Now,
Talking
here's
about
what
the
my
man.
question is: Da Vinci, did he research all of this to make sure that he had people sitting correctly around Jesus or
No.
around the Last
No,
Supper
he
table?
Put it all together.
It's a good
What
question.
if Da Vinci had got the beloved really far removed?
Don't ever read the
Or excluded him completely.
You'll
There you go.
Wasn't there?
Okay.
Since Peter and John were charged with preparing that meal, Luke 2:27 through 13, it is quite likely that the owner of the upper room was not present as the host.
So we eliminate even the owner of the property. Pondy's owner wasn't there, man. Wasn't there.
It was a.
I like that.
It was in the kitchen.
Okay, any other
Whipping
conclusion is an
it.
argument from
Pondering
silence. Also, the repeated connection between Peter and the beloved disciple in the 4th gospel finds an echo in the synoptic gospels by the recurring linking of Peter, James, and John. 5 incidences can be cited. The raising of the little girl thought to be dead. So there's a connection with Peter, James, and John in reference to that actual event in history, the transfiguration. Okay, there's a connection with the 3 there. The prophecy regarding the destruction of Jerusalem. There's the 3 are present. The preparation of the Last Supper. James is omitted, but Peter and John prepared it, and the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, if you would read the next one. If
Peter and James
I have Peter and James highlighted there so you can see it in this red sentence.
If Peter and James already have been ruled out of the running, see above treatment of John 21, then this evidence from the other Gospels of a tight inner circle, comprised of Peter, James, and John,
Or comprised.
points straight to John, son of Zebedee, as the beloved disciple, the frequent associate of Peter in the 4th Gospel.
Okay, now this conclusion only strengthened by evidence from Acts, in which Peter and John, without mention of James, repeatedly act together. And there's the healing of the lame man, the confrontation with religious leaders, the apostolic mission to Samaria, and note also the order of the names in the list of the apostles, with Peter and John listed together at the head. And so the internal evidence, at least from the book of Acts, would suggest that Peter, of course, we already have eliminated him, that John is the beloved disciple, or at least those 2 are tied at the hip. Okay? This traditional conclusion has been vigorously challenged for a host of reasons, the following being among the strongest. So, first, since the beloved disciple is not mentioned in the 4th gospel until chapter 13, and since the 12 were chosen early in the ministry of Jesus, it is argued that the beloved disciple was not one of the 12 and was therefore not John, the son of Zebedee. But this conclusion is not as solid as it might seem. Unlike the other Gospels, the 4th Gospel never tells of the selection of the followers to form a group of 12 disciples, though such a selection is presumed to have taken place. So, in keeping with the others, it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
The stories of the first disciples coming to Jesus mentioned only 4 disciples by name and are more interested in presenting Jesus as the Son of God, King of Israel, for example, than in establishing the identity of the 12. Remember, each synoptic gospel has an intent, a purpose to present certain material. And it certainly wasn't. None of the synoptic gospels or John, it wasn't their purpose to name the 12. And just so that it's not early in the book of John, but later in the book of John, has
It
no
doesn't matter.
significance. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Furthermore, the 12 as a whole play a minor role throughout the first half of the 4th gospel. Only 5 passages mention any of the 12 by name, and only 6 of the 12 disciples are identified: Andrew, Philip, Nathaniel, Thomas, and Judas Iscariot. And so just because he wasn't mentioned, or the beloved wasn't mentioned at the beginning of the John, but towards the latter or middle or towards the latter part, it's too risky to conclude from the latter references to the beloved disciple in reference that he was not one of the 12 among them. All right. There is a second challenge to the fourth gospel's authorship by John, son of Zebedee. Austin, you read.
Okay. It is often noted that the fourth Gospels focus upon the ministry of Jesus in Jerusalem, combined with the author's detailed knowledge of the city and its surrounding geography, rules out a Galilean author, and therefore rules out John, son of Zebedee.
Okay, so one of the reasons that individuals go through and look at all this stuff is that if you're going to print millions and millions of Bibles and you're going to name it the Gospel of John, you better have been able to answer, or at least come to a conclusion that some of these objections carry no weight, period, whatsoever.
Look at all the options.
Look at all the options.
I don't think that statement's actually correct, what he's talking about there, because John pretty much knew a lot about Jerusalem, okay, and he's talked about things that they have only recently discovered.
Okay, but somebody's going to say, well, he wouldn't have known that much about Jerusalem because he is a Galilean. So now we're going to say, okay, well, let's investigate that. Okay, let's see if what you're saying, it really has any weight to it whatsoever. So instead of just saying, well, I don't think that really is true, well, let's investigate that. Okay, so let's go ahead and read.
Can I read?
Yeah, it is often.
Huh?
I thought we were I thought we were on but such an argument.
Yeah, we are.
Okay. But such an argument is difficult to sustain, given the fact that John was a Jew, both by birth and by faith, who would have visited Jerusalem several times annually for the religious celebrations, that as one of the 12 he would have spent time in Jerusalem repeatedly. If we take our cue from the three Passover mentioned in the fourth gospel.
So internal evidence indicates that whoever the beloved disciple is had been to Jerusalem a lot, okay? And you couldn't eliminate John, as the son of Zebedee, just because he was a Galilean, because he would have been there because he was a Jew on multiple occasions. Now, let's talk about the size of Jerusalem. It wasn't like the metropolitan area in Denver. Okay?
Like the size of Cedar Ridge.
It might be the size of Cedar Ridge.
Really?
Okay,
Yeah.
and just because you're from Orchard City doesn't mean that you know nothing about Cedar Ridge.
That's right.
Because you come to the Apple Fest and you come to the spa or the gym.
The gym.
Okay?
Yeah.
Or you go to Big John's. Because the last time I looked in Orchard City, there wasn't a Big John's.
Nope.
So, just because he was a Galilean from Galilee doesn't mean that he couldn't be the beloved disciple. Because he had reason to frequent or visit Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah.
All right? So let's go ahead.
And that as an apostle he lived for years in Jerusalem. We shouldn't be hard pressed to explain any ignorance
Ignorance. Okay.
of Jerusalem on the part of John.
Okay.
Yeah.
And anybody else want to volunteer? Okay.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Furthermore, the writer of the fourth gospel appears interested in Jerusalem, not from personal prejudice or regional loyalty, but from a theological interest in unpacking the significance of Jesus through conflict with religious authorities and through fulfillment of the symbolism of Jewish feasts.
Okay. Go ahead and continue.
Therefore, the Galilean origin of John, along with the Judean slant of the fourth gospel, offer little difficulty to authorship by John, son of Zebedee.
All right, let's do a third challenge now.
Okay. A third challenge to Johannine authorship questions the likelihood of a simple Galilean fisherman crafting such a profound and sophisticated writing in Greek as the fourth gospel. It is often added that Jewish religious leaders characterized Peter and John as, quote, unschooled ordinary men, unquote.
Okay, just stop right there. I have been the personal beneficiary of such thought by my older brother, who is a Jewish rabbi. And he has pointed out that these disciples were unschooled men by the religious leaders. They were considered unschooled men. What does that have to do with? We've touched on it in the past. Does anybody remember?
It doesn't matter if you're.
Or is it another word like unlearned?
Okay, unlearned. Does anybody remember? Do you remember? Okay. Go ahead.
Refresh our memory.
Okay, so they said they were unschooled because they did not go to the same school or the formal school that the Pharisees or the Jews had been taught
That's
at.
right. Now,
Okay.
now
And the only thing that they could come to a conclusion after Peter gave his speech in Acts 2 was that these guys were hanging around Jesus.
Or they're unlearned.
They're
unlearned only because they didn't go to the School of Theology at Jerusalem,
Right. They didn't go
where
to the
all
same
the
schools
religious rulers went, and
that-
so you couldn't hang a cloth in your office, okay, so to speak, and therefore you're not
You
as
didn't
good
know-
as
you didn't
me.
know anything.
Sounds like an Ivy League dispute.
Is it possible we still deal with that kind of mentality?
All the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Church?
All the
the
time.
time.
Okay, just a question.
All the time.
The
the
next
time.
word was ordinary. So
Ordinary.
the Jewish
Ordinary.
scholars were
Oh
extraordinary.
my
They are from the
gosh.
elite.
Yes. They were
Okay.
the upper
So you have
class.
religion written all over that stuff, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, now I can
Right.
see where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go
No.
ahead. But three factors reduce the
I get
force
it.
of this objection. The first, to be called unschooled men by religious leader, probably related to a lack of formal religious training rather than to illiteracy or stupidity. Formal. Who determined what formal was?
They did.
They
The
did.
Jewish
They did.
scholars.
Trust me. They had a master's in education or theology by the time they spent 3 years 24/7 with Jesus, okay? They became pretty wise in reference to their theological training.
Disciple degree.
A disciple degree.
We went there.
What does it take to have a disciple degree, Dan?
Piece of paper.
Let me swing back. Yeah.
Lots of
Circle
setting
back.
We
out.
did the math on this.
Circle
Yeah,
back.
we did the math on that.
We're going to circle back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got a pen
Oh,
and paper.
The equivalence
3 years
time.
of characteristics.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
The equivalence of time that
I
they
don't know.
spent would, I think, equate to about 110 years of
Probably.
normal college education. Yeah, they had quite the advanced degree that you would need in a school based on some of the.
So what I'm
Well-
hearing is they learned about God, but they knew nothing
If we-
about Him.
Well,
Possible.
it's just the mathematics that we figured is just the sheer amount of time that the disciples spent with Jesus and the equivalent to that of, say, one of us going to Mesa
CCU.
University or
CCU,
CCU.
Yeah.
For three
The equivalent amount of time that, say,
9 days.
John or Matthew or someone who was spending personal time with Jesus 24/7 for
years.
3 years.
Equal to the college credits that you would get if you were in class
Yeah.
during that time. Yeah, you got the
Rounded
pretty-
out to be
you got
about
the-
110
you got the advanced-
years
you got the advanced
of
degree.
formal education.
All right. But it
Yeah.
wasn't what flew with them, with the elite ones who had been privileged to go to these formal schools of education. And as a direct result of that, you can't compete with me. And
They're not
in
on
that
the same
sense,
level.
what they're
And
saying
there's
is that
also
John
an economic status with that too, because probably the Jewish folks that could send their children to these elite schools had to pay money for them.
Well, I mean,
Therefore,
John was just a fisherman. Oh my
could
Lord.
not afford that.
Okay.
Do you think
So
if the
it's a
disciples went into churches
socioeconomic-
now that people would
Say
shun
country
them?
bumpkin.
Yes.
So let's so
That's
what
true.
we're doing is we're identifying because of his social economic background, would that eliminate John from being the beloved disciple in reference to the Pharisees and
Pharisees and Sadducees.
Pharisees?
yes, that's
Your
another
teeth are
reason
falling
why
out.
we're going to 10 o'clock on Saturday.
Yeah, we should have got
Because it's too dark for my eye teeth to see what I'm reading.
Need to re-glue your teeth.
Your teeth are giving you an April Fool's.
Finally,
know.
the family of Zebedee may have been prosperous if the use of hired servants in their fishing business is any indication. So they hired people in their fishing, or did they? Or is it possible that they did? Well, you would have to read Mark chapter 1, 19 and 20 to determine that. But read the next thing, Dan. Is it reasonable?
Is it reasonable to imagine that such prosperity and its privileges may have been broadened John's outlook and ability beyond that of the average Galilean?
So, again, you're having to do a lot of suppositions here. It's just, well, what's the mentality in the, social economic class of a Galilean?
Right.
All right. Again, it gets into all this posturing and everything, but some people might say, well, he couldn't have because he came from Galilee and he wasn't learned and so forth, and therefore he couldn't be the beloved disciples, and he's certainly not one of the original 12, or even if he is, there's no way that he had the intellect or whatever to write a book.
He was just a fisherman.
He
Didn't they
was
say that
just
about
a
Jesus?
fisherman.
It was nothing good comes from Bethlehem. I believe there was something
Nazareth.
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 Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay, also note
Yeah,
also
just,
that the Greek in the fourth gospel is arguably the simplest of the New Testament, and seems well within the capacity of a person like John, who may have learned Greek informally as a second language. But wait a minute.
What?
There was a lot of people living during the day and age of Jesus that didn't know Hebrew, and so God knew this and had the Septuagint, which is the translation of the Hebrew scriptures from Hebrew into Greek, prepared specifically for the time and date that Jesus walked and talked on earth. And therefore, the majority of the Jews were inept at Hebrew, but excelled at Greek.
Box checked.
Okay? So maybe somebody making this argument wouldn't have that knowledge. Otherwise, let's consider, why did God...
He's a bilingualist.
Well,
Bilingual?
he may be a bilingual individual knowing Hebrew and Greek. Okay? I don't know. But just to say that because he didn't know Hebrew or he was a Jew meant that he didn't know Greek. But that's interesting because God ordained Ezra to have the Hebrew scripture translated into Greek. Now I wonder what that's all about. See? And that was in 350 BC. The first 5 books was completed within what? A matter of days by 70 scholars. And then the rest of the Hebrew scriptures were interpreted or translated from Hebrew to Greek before Jesus' arrival.
Yeah.
And we've already studied the fact from criticism,
Textual criticism.
what is it?
Textual
Textual
criticism.
criticism.
Textual.
That there was a reason for the Bible being translated into Greek, because the majority of the people who lived during Jesus' day,
Yeah.
the Jews did know Hebrew, but they knew Greek.
And that's what a great part of the population is what they call Hellenistic Jews.
Yeah.
Those that knew Greek and didn't know because they had Greek foundations and everything, and this comes back.
It's just a product of their
Product,
Their
their
environment.
Sure.
growing up, right?
And Jesus was prepared because they had it already on hand in the synagogues, the Septuagint, right along with the Hebrew scripture scrolls.
Oh, wow.
Wasn't it Alexander the Great wanted the
He commissioned.
text to be in Greek so his people could
That's
understand?
absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. You're doing good there, Mr. Manfred.
Good job, Mr. Manfredi.
You're doing good
Yeah,
because that's what we
high five.
studied, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we said.
Yeah. Fourth, some have pointed out that the beloved disciple must not have been among the 12 since he, unlike the 12, loyally stood at the cross of Jesus or stood by the cross as Jesus died. So what they're basically going to say in this fourth point is that the disciples, the 12 original disciples, scattered. And so none of them were around during the crucifixion. But Peter was around enough to where people said, "Aren't you one of the disciples?"
And he denied it.
And he said
Huh?
no 3 times.
Okay,
Some girl went up to him.
yeah. So,
Like a Galilean.
Weren't you with? I didn't know.
all right. So let's go on. Let's go on down to number 5. Just because Peter was present at the phase of Jesus' trial, and that's when he was accused of being a disciple. So he was around. So we know at least Peter stuck around at least close enough on the fringe to know what was going on. And now Jesus is hanging on the cross, and John has a reason to be there. Why did John have a reason to be there? Okay, do it. This is a hard one.
He actually worked in the temple there.
How about maybe an associate was there, somebody that he knew was there too?
Yeah.
Who was there at the foot of the cross?
John.
Huh?
John.
Who was there at the foot of the
Mary.
cross?
Mary.
The mother of Jesus. And if John's a beloved disciple, he's comforting Jesus' family, earthly family. All right? Fifth one. Many have noted how odd it is for John to have omitted from his account several remarkable scenes he had privilege to experience. The raising of the dead girl, the transfiguration, so these won't be found, in John. The prediction regarding the destruction of Jerusalem, and Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. They're mentioned in Mark and so forth, but not in John. And this one's a little more difficult to dismiss, but may somewhat weigh against the
Joanine.
authorship. But several factors may provide a explanation here. So go ahead and read those. Okay.
Had John known of the other 3 Gospels and their growing circulation, he may have felt less compelled to include in his own account these events clearly reported by others. Such discipline would have required him to omit many remarkable events, but would have permitted him to include other noteworthy events not yet circulating in written form, for example, the raising of Lazarus. In the final analysis, the author of the 4th Gospel admits that no entire report of Jesus' amazing ministry is possible. John 20, 30, 21, and 25.
And so we just go back to each book. Each of the Synoptic Gospels and the book of John have a purpose they have a theme. And you don't include stuff unless it's part of your theme. Now we know that the life and times of Jesus were themes of the first of the Synoptics. Matthew, Luke, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And you have one, Matthew, presenting Jesus with a genealogy as being the Son of Man. All right.
The man side, yeah.
And then you have Luke, I believe it is, that presents Jesus as the Son of God and following that genealogy. So they have different purposes. John's purpose for writing, we're going to find out tonight. Okay. But it's not necessarily to give a biology, a 5 minutes remaining.
Yes.
I just got the flashcard.
You
Okay.
blew out.
Will you work for food too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the sixth, many have concluded that no author would have designated himself the beloved disciples. Well, if he's telling a story and he's part of the story, then he gets designated as a beloved disciple. This is not arrogance. This is just the way to communicate the story. All right. Let's just jump all the way down the bottom of the page because I guess we need to take a look at concluding this evening. Read that, Dan.
Nevertheless, after all is considered from the above discussions, we can judge it most probable that John, son of Zebedee, one of the 12 disciples, was the beloved disciples, that he wrote the bulk of the contents of the fourth gospel, if not all, and that it's possible his disciples edited and published his work sometime after his death.
Okay, so that kind of deals with the some of the concerns with what happens when you don't have an actual name within the book, but the book be named after the name that you don't actually have in it. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. And it can be very confusing, but individuals who are responsible for making sure that we have canonized scripture that belongs within the Bible. These are the great lengths and pains that they go to be able to give an answer as to why the Gospel of John is named the Gospel of John. When we just take, the majority of the people just take it for granted. But this is the behind the scenes work that's necessary to be able to answer all the possibilities and to eliminate possibilities and so forth. So John is the author. He is the son of Zebedee from Galilee, the beloved disciple.